The staff of the Tuscaloosa News and TideSports.com join WVUA 23's Jenn Chapman at Wilhagan's Grill and Tap Room for an in-depth analysis of the Crimson Tide and SEC football. This is Tide Sports TV.
Welcome to Tide Sports TV, live from Wilhagan's every Monday night at 6 p.m. We're going to kick things off with the big picture brought to you by the Soup Store. Joining me is Aaron Suttles, the beat writer for the Tuscaloosa News with Alabama football. Aaron, it wasn't a pretty win and it wasn't a big win, but it was a win this weekend for Alabama football against Tennessee. What did you notice about the Tide that impressed you?
Well, it was a tough day, obviously, offensively. I'll say a couple things that impressed me the most were, one, the defense rising to the occasion at the very end. You know, they had a rough start at the beginning, the first two drives, and then obviously at the very end where Tennessee drove down and took the lead in 4 plays. But when it mattered with the game on the line, they got after Joshua Dobbs, they got the sack, forced the turnover, and dominated that game. And then, two, with Alabama needing a drive, Jake Coker led his team down the field and punched it in for a touchdown when they didn't have a lot of momentum going into that drive. So to be able to kind of do that in a very dramatic spot, a very tough spot with their backs against the wall, showed me that Jake Coker is taking that next step and has become a leader of this offense.
I think the biggest difference between the two teams is that Alabama shows they know how to win, and Tennessee hasn't got that X factor yet to make a big game like that actually go their way.
Well, absolutely. You look at Tennessee, and they got a lot of talent. They've been recruiting well for about 2 or 3 years now, but we saw it against Oklahoma early in the year. They couldn't close that game out. We saw it against Florida, losing. They couldn't close that game out. They did win that Georgia game, which was big for them, but again, in a late game situation, they have a lead. They couldn't close it out. But you can certainly see the talent gap that used to be there is shrinking between Alabama and Tennessee. They've got the players. Now they just have to learn how to win.
Now, for the score to be 19-14, Alabama had a lot of errors, a lot of things that were not showing up. They did look sluggish, and Coach Nick Saban said that after the game as well. They looked dead-legged, according to him. What were some areas of improvement that they must improve before they play LSU?
Yeah, if they want to, with all their goals on the table, if they want to play for an SEC championship, possibly get into the playoff, they have to stop giving up so many tackles for losses. They're dead last in the SEC in allowing tackles for loss, and that kind of blows me away because we went into the season thinking this offensive line would be among the best in the nation, and it seems like they're I think they're averaging allowing 8 tackles for loss a game, which is kind of astounding to me. You got a big 245-pound running back, you got a good offensive line, but for whatever reason, they're giving up a lot of negative plays. They've got to get that cleaned up because the defense is good enough, and the offense does make some big plays. But if you continue to give up, you set yourself up for 2nd and 12, 3rd and 14, it's going to lead to a lot of errors on offense.
And it really appeared to me that Cam Robinson is not 100%. He looked like he was getting beat continuously.
Yeah, he's getting beat a lot right now with a speed rush. For whatever reason, he cannot. He's not planning. He's not moving real well. We knew he had a knee injury going into the season that he happened in fall. He's got a little bit of shoulder issues. And fans are kind of harping on him right now because he's given up some plays. He's still injured better than any other option they have. Cam Robinson at 75% is better than anyone else they can put in there. So they're going to live or die with him.
If Cecil was here, he would say, you find me someone off the bench who can be better than him.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the bye week. How important is it that they are getting this bye week now and that it's also right before LSU?
Well, I asked Nick Saban that question last Monday, and he looked at me like I was an alien. He said, why do you think we're tired? And then his first answer after the game was, man, we were so tired. Like, come on, Coach.
You can't tell that before the game, though.
No, it's just coaching psychology. He couldn't admit and allow his players to buy into the fact that we've played 7 straight weeks, we're tired. Well, now they've played 8 straight weeks. You're banged up. And not only physically. I think we forget sometimes that mentally it's draining to have to prepare for a different game plan every week, on top of having homework, getting up, having to do your schoolwork, having to have a social life. To do those game plans week in and week out, it takes something out of you mentally. And so I think they could just use the time to step back, breathe, and then just kind of go back to the fundamentals this week and then start LSU preparation next week.
And I think while people get caught up in watching the game, they're not seeing what's going on in the sidelines.
Yeah.
And the sideline looked very different at this game than it did against Texas A&M. Texas A&M, they were way more rowdy, way more into it. It was almost like the sideline was kind of quiet and dead-legged as well.
Yeah, and I'll say this, I didn't think Bryant-Denny Stadium was a great atmosphere. For a rivalry game, it was kind of dead until the very end, and I think the players feed off of that sometimes. It just wasn't a lot of energy in the building, but at the very end when they got the sack, and they ran to the sideline and almost killed about 15 beat riders when they were celebrating. They had a lot of energy then.
That's when it came. All right, let's move forward. We're going to skip LSU. We're just going to go into the SEC.
Okay.
Big games this past weekend. How important was the Arkansas-Auburn game, and what did it show?
Well, Arkansas is better than everyone thinks they are, and I think even though Auburn's struggling, to go into 4 overtimes on the road, they haven't given up. They're a team that's still in search of what they want to be, but they haven't quit. But that was a big win. That meant a lot to Brett Bielema. He does not like Auburn for whatever reason. And the fans, that's becoming a rivalry game for them. But it essentially puts Auburn they're going to have to win a couple of games to become bowl eligible. This was a team that, Jeremy Johnson was going to win the Heisman. They're going to win the SEC. They're going to be in the playoff. They're going to have to win some games or they're not going to make a bowl game.
That might not even happen.
Yeah.
Ole Miss then fell out of a lot of the discussion, and all of it became about Alabama, LSU. They go out this past weekend and send a huge message. Yeah. How good are they?
It's tough. I don't know if Ole Miss is any good or if Texas A&M is just a complete mess right now. Kevin Sumlin is under a lot of heat right now with the way he handled Kyler Murray, their backup quarterback. He left Kyle Allen in when it was pretty obvious he was struggling. So he's got some issues to win his team back. So I don't know how good Ole Miss is because they lost to Memphis, and Memphis is a good football team. But I don't know how good Ole Miss is, and I don't know how bad Texas A&M is. But Ole Miss has got we're going to find out real quick. If you look at what they have left, boy, they got a tough schedule.
Well, Alabama fans get to enjoy watching the rest of the SEC this weekend. What game are you looking forward to the most?
Probably, Ole Miss, watching them play. They got Auburn. And to see if Auburn's going to continue to fight and see – Auburn can put up some points. They got Sean White at quarterback now. All Alabama fans are going to be watching that game because they need Ole Miss to lose.
So they're actually going to be rooting for the Tigers.
I know.
That's what you're saying?
Believe it or not, they're going to be pulling for the orange and blue this weekend.
That's crazy. All right, let's move to the national stage.
Yeah.
Utah falls this weekend. How much does that change things now with the talk about the playoff picture?
Well, some people had them in their top 4. They dominated Oregon early in the year. They beat Michigan, and USC just beat them like a drum. So obviously them falling, that'll create some room for people to move up. And if Alabama with one loss continues to see some of these other unbeatens getting slowly knocked off, Alabama will just keep stepping up and stepping up. But Alabama's got to keep winning too.
And to reference our good friend Cecil, he would say this is why you do not pick a top 4 before it's time to pick a top 4.
Exactly. And I think they actually start the rankings next week. So we'll actually have next show, we'll have the top 4 to discuss.
Another team that's also impressive and moving up as well, Stanford. So you think they could be in the mix? And
They look like a complete football team right now. It would be intriguing because of the style of play for Alabama and Stanford to meet in a top 4 playoff game because they're kind of mirror images of each other. They look both physical. They love to run the football. They love to dominate the line of scrimmage. But Stanford right now, I wouldn't want to play them.
And Alabama fans should be paying attention to this picture. Should they go in the playoffs, there's plenty of teams that they may see that they normally do not get a chance at.
Yeah.
So it'll be exciting. Well, that's all the time we have right now. When we come back, we'll be joining with Ben Jones. We're going to go inside the Tide, break down the offense and defense and a little bit of the special teams. But don't worry, Aaron will be back with us to answer your questions near the end of the show. Stay with us. Welcome back to Tide Sports TV, live from Wilhagan's every Monday night at 6 p.m. Now it's time to go inside the Tide, brought to you by Ziegler Meats. Joining me from the Tuscaloosa News is Ben Jones. Ben, let's first talk about the game-winning drive from Alabama's offense. Does this prove that Jake Coker can lead the Alabama team?
I think it's definitely an encouraging sign. I think that he already had the confidence of the rest of the offense before this week, and showing something like this at the end of a tight game, in a rivalry game, in a situation like that, really probably brings anyone who wasn't already in the fold, whether that's inside or outside the program, all the way into this point. And I think by this point in the season, most of the people within the program already trusted him and knew what he was capable of doing. This was just the first opportunity that he'd really had to show what he was capable of in a situation like that. This was the latest that Alabama had trailed all year. I think it was 5:49 left in the fourth quarter when Tennessee scored. They were able to go right back, get the score afterwards, and the defense was able to respond as well.
So far in this season, where would you say that drive ranks amongst the other drives? Is that the top drive now for the season, something that this season can be remembered for?
I would say it's definitely the most pressure-filled drive. You know, there were situations against Ole Miss where there was a lot of pressure as well. But I think in that situation where you were coming from down 3 touchdowns, it was kind of a little bit of a different situation. That was kind of a fast and furious offense type thing. When you get the ball back with the amount of time left that Alabama had on Saturday against Tennessee, you have to do a little bit more. It's not just a matter of try and see how fast you can go and score just to get back into the game. It's a matter of you need to go down the field, you need to get a touchdown to take the lead. You need to also take some time off the clock so that Tennessee doesn't have 3.5 minutes left when they got the ball. I think all of those things really worked in Alabama's favor once it was all said and done.
Interesting you brought up the time clock, because I noticed on Twitter people were panicking that Alabama scored too quickly. And I always think that's a little bit ridiculous, because when you have the opportunity to score, you probably shouldn't be worrying about the clock. You should probably worry about scoring. And I think that was a little surprising that fans were really harping on the time clock.
They put the defense back on the field with way too much time.
Defense, that's good.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the offensive line. Aaron and I touched on it a little bit earlier. They showed some weakness again this weekend. What do they need to do over this bye week to give Jake more protection and Derrick Henry?
I think they need to heal up first and foremost. Dominic Jackson left the game with an ankle injury. I don't think that he came back. Aaron already talked about Cam Robinson, who's been dealing with at least one nagging injury throughout the season, maybe a couple that we're just not really aware of. We don't know exactly the full extent of what kind of injuries the offensive line has been dealing with. If it was just Cam Robinson who's been dealing with some of those things, or if some of the other guys are also banged up. My suspicion would be that they are banged up. Those guys have just played 8 games in a row, 4 SEC games in a row, that they were on the road twice in the last 4 weeks. That's a tough stretch for any team. And I think having a week off, having a couple of days with no practice, a couple of days where they can back off and not go into a game plan, just kind of focus on what they need to do execution-wise, that should help them clean up some of the problems that you saw against Tennessee.
All right, another thing we hear the fans saying is they want Kiffin to stick to the play calling with running Derrick Henry. But realistically, how much can Derrick Henry handle if he's continually called on?
Well, last I checked, and I haven't checked since the Tennessee game, but before that, after the Texas A&M game, he was on track, if Alabama played 14 games this season, for him to have the most carries in school history.
Wow.
So that's quite a workload for him at this point. I think a lot of people, one of the things you always hear about Derrick Henry is that he's a guy who gets stronger as the game goes on. I was looking at some of his numbers just before I came over here. He actually is averaging more yards per carry in the first half than in the second half. Now, that can be skewed by all kinds of things. That can be a matter of, if they have a big lead in the second half, then teams know that he's going to run it or anything like that. That doesn't mean that it's easier to tackle Derrick Henry after halftime. I think it's probably just as difficult to bring him down at any point during the game. But I think that what a lot of people are looking for out of Derrick Henry, he's giving you everything that he can give you at this point. And I don't know if you can rely on Derrick Henry for 40 touches a game when you're already giving it to him 30 times.
And I think Coach Saban has also touched on that as well, that they need more people stepping up. And I think he's speaking Kenyon Drake. And again, we get this question asked every week, where's Bo Scarborough's role, Damian Harris, and we'll see if they get added into the mix. Mm-hmm. Moving to the defensive front 7, were some weaknesses exposed this week against Tennessee?
If there were any, I don't know that I saw them. I thought that Tennessee did a really good job of executing. I think that Josh Dobbs did a very good job of taking his time and finding open guys. Also, he was probably the best running quarterback that Alabama has faced this year, and maybe the best one that they will face. Obviously, it's kind of tough to guess who they're going to play in the postseason. But I think that that's one thing that's always going to give any defense trouble. The narrative has always been that running quarterbacks give Alabama trouble, but the narrative really probably ought to be that running quarterbacks give anyone trouble. If you have an athlete on the field in that position, it counts for one more guy that the defense has to cover. It just makes everything a little bit more difficult. I think in that case, you probably saw Josh Dobbs have a little bit more success against Alabama's defense than what some people might have been expecting. But he's a good player, and I don't think that the defensive line played poorly at all this week. I think they had 5 sacks this weekend. I thought they played pretty well.
And you said they're first in the SEC for sacks as well.
Yes,
so
they are.
Obviously, they're putting pressure on.
The defensive line has 10 sacks in the last 2 weeks. I don't think that's the part of the team that we need to be worried about at this point.
All right, moving to also on the defense, though. The safeties, not as big of a game as it was last, but they still were covering well for somebody like Dobbs. What did you think about their play?
I thought they did a really good job again. Eddie Jackson left, I think, just before halftime. He had another ankle injury, or a knee injury rather, but was able to come back into the game. Kind of an encouraging sign. That's another one of those nagging injuries that a bye week can really help heal up. Ankle sprains, knee sprains, anything that's not really serious, where you can just get off your feet for a few days, have some extra time. That's really going to help when you have 3 or 4 days to back off things in practice. The safety play overall, I think, has probably been better than expected for Alabama this year. There were a lot of questions going into the season about how the secondary was going to perform, and I think that they've definitely found more playmakers in the secondary than they thought they were going to find in August.
And would you say the real test for Alabama defensively is coming up? It's just 2 weeks ahead with Leonard Fournette.
Yeah, it is, and Leonard Fournette is the guy who gets all the credit on that LSU offense, and rightfully so. He's probably the best football player in America. But you also have to look, you've got a quarterback who has 9 passing touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns and hasn't thrown an interception this year. You got a kicker off for LSU who hasn't missed a kick, field goal, or extra point all season long. That's a really good team that's not going to beat itself. And the test for the defensive line, like we talked about against Georgia, is going to be how they can line up against a team that's going to try and run the ball right at them and see how well they can stop that.
Now, Coach Saban said the team is both mentally and physically tired. This bye week couldn't come at a better week. How do they use this week to also not just recover, but to start getting an extra foot on LSU?
Right. I think a lot of people expect during a bye week a team to just go ahead and start looking at whoever's ahead and spend as much time as they possibly can just kind of cramming for that opponent like you would do for a test in college. And I don't think that's always what coaches try to do. When we talked to Nick Saban earlier today in Birmingham, he talked about wanting to take 2 or 3 days to kind of focus on what Alabama needs to do better as far as what Alabama needs to improve on before going on and looking at LSU and installing that game plan. They still have a routine that they use every week for games, and I think that they're going to try and mostly stick to that this week. They might take an extra day or two before when they start installing the game plan for LSU. But the first couple days of practice will probably be much lighter. They'll probably do a little bit more film work, look back on some of the issues that they had in the Tennessee game, the Texas A&M game, the Ole Miss game, any game where they think that they could have played better. They're going to try and see what those problems were and address those first before they move on to LSU, and I think that's the advantage you have in the bye week.
And I think we understand their sense of tiredness. I know in the media, we're tired as well at this point in the season. It's a grind covering the football season. What do you plan on doing for your weekend off?
I'm going to let the DVR be my guide. I know you were talking with Aaron about what the best game to watch this weekend is. I'm going to come back on Saturday night after all the games are done and pick it out. I think I'll probably spend Saturday afternoon in the woods going on a hike or getting out of town doing something kind of with my day off.
See, so everybody around here needs a little bit of a break. But, of course, they can enjoy the other SEC games and see which ones are going to pick up a win and loss. And apparently everyone's rooting for Auburn.
Right?
Yeah.
Florida, Georgia.
We'll have Ben join us in just a little bit. When we come back, we're going to answer your questions that you posted on the TideSports.com message board, so stay with us. We're back on Tide Sports TV, and now it's time to answer your questions that you posted on the TideSports.com message board or that you tweeted at us at Tide Sports TV. The first question, do Alabama opponents go through some kind of post-UA letdown? Is that what happened to A&M and to Georgia when it lost to Tennessee after Alabama?
That was an interesting argument when the stat came up that so many teams take a bye week before Alabama. There was some talk that maybe it's best served that they take the bye week after Alabama because Alabama was such a physical game for teams that it really takes it out of you. That defensive line goes about 9 to 10 defensive players deep. The offensive line's pretty physical, so you can make a good argument that, yeah, Georgia didn't play its best after Alabama, and certainly Texas A&M didn't last week.
And Butch Jones said after the game that his team was playing against a team that's going to have almost everybody go to the NFL. So that right there tells you what they think about Alabama. Let's go to the next question. Who is Alabama's best cover cornerback? We'll start with Ben.
Cyrus Jones.
Yeah, I mean, how's this even a question?
I mean, it was a question someone asked.
I don't know. Come on. Do better.
Better
Cyrus
questions.
Jones is obviously the best cover corner for Alabama.
We got the new Cecil out here. All right, let's go to the next one then. Hopefully this one's better. Has Adam Griffith turned a corner as well as J.K. Scott? And we can say that J.K. Scott was named the SEC Special Teams Player of the Week, so that tells you yes. But what about Adam Griffith?
I don't know. I'll ask the viewers. Is Alabama was driving there with the game on the line, would you have felt comfortable with Adam Griffith kicking a game-winning field goal?
He's been streaky this year, right?
Yeah.
He'll make 4 or 5 in a row, and then he'll miss 2 or 3, and then he'll make
Yeah.
4 or 5 more, and kind of goes back and forth, right?
Yeah, he's in a good groove right now, which is good. But the ones he took on Saturday were pretty short. But a field goal's
He made
3
them.
points, whether it's 52 yards or 27. But I just want, if he would have had to have lined up for a game-winning field goal, there would have been a lot of nervous people in Bryant-Denny Stadium.
Listen,
Saturday.
he was 2 for 2, and Tennessee's kicker was 0 for 3. So I
Yeah.
think that says enough, and
Yeah.
everyone can lay off Adam Griffith for this week. So he gets the bye on questions. All right, we've got another question, this one coming from Twitter. Are there any QBs left in the Heisman race, or is this the year of the running back?
I'll let Ben take this.
Trevon Boykin and Deshaun Watson.
Yes, Deshaun Watson was actually my dark horse for the Heisman throughout the year, but it's Leonard Fournette and then it's everyone else right now.
What about, does a lot of Leonard Fournette's hinge on how he plays against Alabama?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a primetime game. Everyone's going to be watching it, and it's a really good opportunity for Derrick Henry to insert himself into that race. If Alabama shuts down Leonard Fournette and Derrick Henry goes for 150 and a couple touchdowns, maybe he's in the thick of it.
Alabama's done a really good job in recent years, both of ending some Heisman campaigns pretty early and also starting them, or at least launching them up to the next level, I think.
And for those of you wondering, it really is a primetime game. Today it was announced that Alabama and LSU will play at 7 p.m. on November 7th.
5th straight year that's in the primetime.
Crank the deadline up.
All right, who is the best quarterback Alabama has faced so far? Will Mississippi State's Dak Prescott be the best QB that Alabama will see before the playoffs?
The best that they've played so far this year is probably Josh Dobbs. Dak will be the best they've played.
Yes, I agree.
Consensus, yes. All right, well, that was an easy one. Here we go. Oh, we're going to actually move to basketball. We've got a basketball question, which the excitement starts with the tip-off on Tuesday. What do you think about the job Avery Johnson is doing in raising the profile of the Alabama basketball program? What kind of excitement do you see from the fan base? And I'll say, we see a lot of promos from him at Alabama football.
Yeah.
So they're even using the football fans to bring in as well.
Well, he's doing a tremendous job, and when you juxtapose that with what Anthony Grant was doing, it looks even more magnified. I mean, Avery is everywhere. He's on television. He's taking I don't think he turns down an interview. If we want him on this show, we could probably get him.
Okay, now we're going to get him.
Come on, Coach.
We'll
come
get
on our
him.
show. But he's invited media to the practice. He's doing this this week. He's doing the fan tip-off. He's just making trying to get people to come to Alabama basketball, which I mean that's kind of crazy that that's viewed as revolutionary, but that's where we are right now with Alabama basketball.
I think it's really impressive when you look at the recruiting work that he's done in just 1 year. I think a lot of times some players would like to see a system kind of in place. They'd like to see some kind of success or track record, or be able to talk to players on the roster about kind of the experience they have under a coach. To be able to get guys to buy in without having done any of that at all to this point has been really impressive.
I mean, he's got a top 10 class right now.
Yeah.
It's going to be, I don't want to say a lean year, but it's not going to be, they're not going to the Final Four this year. They probably won't make the NCAA tournament. They were voted, I think, 13th out of 14th by a recent.
That doesn't matter.
Yeah. So
What does the media know?
Yeah, we never get anything right. But my point is, you don't have too high of expectations this year. But I do think his genuine enthusiasm and the style of play will get people coming to the games, and that's where they want the program, because that will lead to better recruiting, more success. It's all feeds into each other.
I think they'll surprise some teams. I also really want the shirt that says all day, every day.
I haven't seen that one.
That shirt. All right, we've got one more quick question from Twitter. What's up with the officiating the last 2 games? I am not answering this.
Do we get fined by the SEC office if we answer
No,
this?
they have no control over us.
Opinion?
I saw a stat. Alabama has 27 sacks on the year. Opposing offensive lines have only been called for 2 holdings against Alabama all year. So either they're doing a phenomenal job of not holding really good Alabama defensive linemen, or they're just not calling it.
That's a very interesting statistic. We got to fact check that, right?
That's why I make the big bucks.
All right, that's all the time we have for this week's Tide Sports TV. Next week, we have free barbecue here at Wilhagan, so you should join us. It's Monday night at 6 p.m., and of course, we are going to be breaking down the upcoming game against LSU. Have a good night.